sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, on this Wednesday, February 20th, 2019 day. So grateful that you have decided to join us today, and it is quite a show for you on the Millennial Roundtable of Point of View. And we have got around the roundtable in studio with me is David Fraga here in Dallas area. David, how are you today?
Doing great, man.
So good to have you, as always. And then we've also got Lathan Watts, and Lathan works at First Liberty, is working in their communications. There's a little bit going on at First Liberty right now.
Just a little, yeah.
Share with our listeners a little bit what's going on.
Well, Wednesday morning, we will be in the Supreme Court of the United States for oral argument defending the Bladensburg World War I Veterans Memorial on behalf of our client, the American Legion. So that's a case that has been working its way through the courts for many years now, and we're finally at oral argument next week.
And so for 10% of the Americans that are listening right now know that Judge Judy is not on the Supreme Court, is what a recent study I found indicated. But so tell us a little bit about this Bladensburg case. I think especially just because, one, it's so significant to argue before the Supreme Court, and then two, just in particular, the topic of what you're doing relative to religious liberty is so significant, especially for our listeners.
Certainly. So the Bladensburg World War I Memorial is in Bladensburg, Maryland, and it was originally put up nearly 100 years ago by Gold Star Mothers to honor 49 men from Prince George's County, Maryland, who did not return from World War I. And the American Legion, our client, helped those moms finish the fundraising and with the property and the construction of the memorial. They honored the American Legion by putting the seal of the American Legion at the center of the memorial. And it stood there, as I said, for about 90 years in honor of these men until a couple of lawyers from the American Humanist Association drove by to get offended and file a lawsuit to tear it down. They want it torn down because the memorial is in the shape of a cross, and it sits on land that is maintained by the state of Maryland through their, I think it's the Parks Commission or something. And it's important to note that the mothers chose the shape for the memorial. They chose the cross shape because it was similar to the actual gravestones that their sons were buried under. Mm-hmm. And at that time, a lot of them were buried in Europe. The mothers didn't know whether or not their sons would ever be brought back to America. And so many of them considered that memorial to be a gravestone for their son. Mm-hmm. So they wanted it to look like the gravestones they were buried under. Now, it was originally not on government property. The state of Maryland took possession of the property as they were expanding a highway in the area for maintenance and so forth. But even then, they literally went out of their way, not to disturb this memorial. When you go there today, the road curves around it, so it sits almost in a median. Yeah. So the American Humanist Association, as I said, filed a lawsuit. We actually won that case at the district court level. They appealed to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. At oral argument in front of the Fourth Circuit, one of the judges suggested that well, maybe we could just chop the arms off the cross, and that would make it constitutional. We, of course, were not in favor of that solution. The Fourth Circuit actually ruled against us, so we appealed to the Supreme Court of the United States. Thankfully, they agreed to hear the case. So we'll be, as I said, at oral argument next week. Now, one of the most important aspects of this for the far-reaching implications for religious liberty is not only are we arguing that this memorial itself is constitutional, it does not violate the Establishment Clause, but in our brief to the court, we actually suggested that the analysis the court has used for probably the last 30 years or so, that comes out of a case called Lemon versus Kurtzman, in the legal world, it's just known as the Lemon test. We had, in our brief, said that the Lemon test has really contributed to more confusion than it has clarified, and we're suggesting a new standard for the court that is more in line with the actual text of the Constitution that says, Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of a religion. So what we're advocating is that I don't want to call it a new, because it would actually be returning to the original, but a different standard for this type of analysis that is more based on, does whatever matter that you're analyzing, does it coerce anyone into worship, or does it compel them to support some sort of state-approved church? And if the court accepts that, it will be a major, major victory in religious liberty.
So help our listeners understand the Lemon Standard. For me, that's a new concept. And again, like I know that I don't know a lot, and so help us understand Lemon Standard.
As I said, it comes out of a case called Lemon versus Kurtzman, and the court kind of detailed the different variables that they look at to determine in cases like this if the Establishment Clause has been violated. And it's just become kind of convoluted. It gets into things like, does it give the impression of an unnecessary entanglement between government and religion? And there's a lot of these terms that are used in the standard that have been open to interpretation. And then the application of that standard in other cases is what has sort of contributed to the environment that we find ourselves in right now, where if you're a public school teacher and it's Christmas time and you want to have a bulletin board about Christmas, can you have anything referring to the nativity scene, or do you have to have, well, yeah, you can, but do you have enough reindeer on there also, and Santa Claus and everything else to be able to meet this standard? Lots of cases, frankly, that First Liberty's been involved in have been because of confusion over what the Establishment Clause means. So if we could get the court to really clarify this by returning to the text of the First Amendment and a more workable coercion standard, or compelling people to support a church, it would eliminate a lot of confusion and hopefully keep a lot of these types of cases from ever clogging up the courts again. It would just be a clear standard that would be more understandable, not just by the general public, but by the lower court judges as well, because this Lemon test has confused a lot of lower court judges.
So one of the things, and I know some of our listeners are casual to largely very much paying attention to what's happening at the Supreme Court. And so one of the trends we keep on seeing at the Supreme Court is just it's very tight rulings that they're offering. And it seems like, from your vantage point, what First Liberty is doing is it's not necessarily wanting a tight ruling here. It's very much not just wanting the Brandenburg case, but also it's wanting to change a 30-year precedent, it seems like.
Right. And that's I think we will probably know when we get that decision, likely towards the very end of the term. Usually big cases like this are announced very late in the term, and this is, frankly, the biggest case of this term. I think there's more amicus briefs filed on this case than any other case they're hearing this term. I think when we get that decision, when you see if it is a 6-3 or a 7-2, and there's a large majority, then it's probably a pretty narrow decision, saying, yes, you can keep this memorial here, which would still be a huge victory because Arlington National Cemetery is in the Fourth Circuit as well. And there are other memorials that would come down if this decision isn't overturned. But if you see that decision come out and it's 5-4 and it's Justice Roberts writing for the 5 majority, then it's likely they have done something, maybe not overtly overturn Lemon, but take our reasoning in that case.
That's fascinating. So, but we got to cut to a break right now. And so when we come back from the break, we'll continue talking a little bit about this case. I've got a couple of questions, and I'm glad we got somebody that's done more than just watch Law and Order here. And then also we're going to be talking a little bit about justice for Juicy, some of the interesting things that are coming out of the Smollett case. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
The editorial board of the Wall Street Journal asked a good question the other day. They wondered who's afraid of socialism. Their argument was that the new progressive agenda looks like government control over the means of production. Isn't that the textbook definition of socialism? The president has been criticized for saying that there are new calls to adopt socialism in this country, but Democrats in Congress and pundits in the media have protested that the socialist label doesn't apply to them. So the editors decided to take a look at a few of the items on the agenda. Medicare for All is one example. Senator Bernie Sanders and 16 other senators proposed a program that would replace all private health insurance with a federally administered single-payer health care program. The government would decide what care you would receive, what to pay doctors and hospitals, and even which drugs would be on the formulary. That sounds like socialized medicine. The Green New Deal is also on the progressive agenda. Nearly 4 dozen House Democrats and several Democratic presidential candidates have endorsed the plan. As I've written about in a previous commentary, it requires the country to be carbon neutral within 10 years. This will not happen, but even the attempt would require a massive amount of government intrusion into all of our lives. That really looks like socialism. To pay for these and other progressive agenda items, proponents call for a level of taxation never seen before. Democratic candidates are talking about everything from a 70% tax rate on higher incomes to a wealth tax on assets in this country, as well as those held abroad. This tax scheme also looks like socialism. We all know the phrase, if it looks like a duck and walks like a duck, it is a duck. Politicians and the media can protest that the socialist label doesn't apply. Most of us know that it does. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From roadside attractions, Run the Race. 2 brothers share an unbreakable bond, but life's unexpected adversities put their future in question. Run the Race, rated PG, in theaters February 22nd.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable by Lathan Watts and David Fraga. Let's jump into something a little bit more controversial. It's what I really want to do. I want to have some fun here for a little bit, especially since we've got David and Lathan. And so hopefully my job is going to be able to pit those two together. So hopefully they get to the verge of fisticuffs, and then I can just start flexing to be able to keep them from fighting. But I don't think that's going to happen. So let's jump into something else, shall we? So we've got a story that has come out, and this on the Point of View website at pointofview.net. You can click on the Point of View website, click on today's show, and you'll be able to see this article that I'm so interested in. And something that's been working its way around social media. Then what was a local news story now has turned into a national news story that has implications into various facets of society. And it goes because of a TV star named Juicy Smollett. He's on a roll on the Fox show Empire. I think it's a Fox show, Empire. So. And so Smollett was reported on January 29th. He was attacked by 2 masked men as he was walking home from a Subway restaurant. He claimed that the men shouted racist and anti-gay slurs at him, poured a chemical substance on him, threw a rope around his neck, and shouted, "This is MAGA country." Well, come to find out, that is a little bit different than what's actually taken place. There's been other individuals that have come alongside and been able to offer up incriminating evidence that indicated that this isn't necessarily what's taken the place. It appears as though now is this orchestrated attempt for Jussie to be able to try to advance the political agenda. And so now we're finding ourselves with the realization that in a shocking twist, there wasn't 2 guys in the middle of the night, in the morning, during a polar vortex in Chicago that were looking to be able to beat up an Empire star. There's like, I've watched a couple of episodes of Law and Order, okay? So I know how to put clues together, okay? I read the Hardy Boys growing up. And so there's just a couple of things that pieces of evidence that made this story seem a little painted me skeptical to say the least. And so now we're finding out more and more this story's just not true. And so help us to understand this. Is this do you think this is an overreaction from the media standpoint? Do you think that this is just another example of what's been affectionately termed Trump derangement syndrome, where you just have an individual that has gone to great lengths because he just doesn't like our president? Help us to understand this story.
Well, first of all, your qualifications of the Hardy Boys and Law and Order put you light years ahead of most major media when it comes to evaluating the veracity of claims. I have told my kids when things like this happen in the press, I've used them as kind of teachable moments. And the first lesson is never, ever believe initial reports because they are often inaccurate. People are in a rush to get news out, and especially in a 24-hour-a-day news cycle. Like, always wait for the follow-up report. You'll get a clearer picture if you wait. As far as getting either more facts or, in this case, different facts, about what actually happened, and you don't want to find yourself in the uncomfortable position that a lot of celebrities are in right now, who initially reacted to the initial reports, and now they're backpedaling very quickly and trying to square what they said initially with now what appears to be the actual facts of what's going on. So, I mean, your skepticism is justified. I think basic journalistic principles would have, had they been applied, would have probably taken the reaction that you did and not just jumped on this, waited to see a little more facts and then investigate it for whatever it is. My first reaction was, how'd they find 2 MAGA hats in Chicago?
Yeah, exactly.
That should have been your first clue that maybe this isn't exactly what we think it is. But I think his motivation, I mean, only he really knows that.
Yeah. But. David, there's just so much. We've seen this before, right? So let's go back just like a month ago with even the Covington Catholic boys, where we see this initial jump because of a viral video that just spreads like wildfire. And then because of that, the media feels as though they have to report on it. And if you looked at the viral video, that 1 minute clip was awful to be able to see. But then comes out the hour, 15-minute or 2-hour clip that paints a fuller picture. And so what we continue, is this a media's fault? Is this just is this a user error on our fault? Is this just an indictment on our highly politicized culture right now? Help us to think about this.
Honestly, my first initial reaction of this was just like, man, it doesn't make sense because he's coming out of a subway. He's coming out of a subway in Chicago. Yeah. This guy, he's a TV star. I mean, you have all these different app services that can deliver you a sandwich or something. I mean, what guy is going to go to Subway and then just walk out and then,
then hold on to it after you've gotten beat. Then to be able to hold on to a Subway, no offense to Subway, and I'm sorry, this might be disparaging to Subway. I just do not prefer going to Subway because you smell like Subway for the rest of the day, and so I am not a big Subway. Jersey Mike's, you got me. Firehouse Subs, you got me. Those places, I don't smell like them after I leave them, but whenever I go to Subway, I smell like Subway for the next 3 days, even though I've showered 16 times, and so I'm just a little skeptical towards the Subway claim. And then to be able to hold on to the Subway after you've been pummeled and poured chemical substance on. Yeah. So keep on going. Sorry.
It just, and there's a lot of celebrities that are actually saying, wow, did he actually stage his own, this hate crime, quote unquote. And I know he went to an interview with the Chicago PD, but he's not willing to go back a second time. Yeah. He's just saying just one is enough. And so it's just really suspicious. I don't know your thoughts either. Also, Lathan, I just think he's just trying to get some publicity. I just think he's just trying to go out of his way to do something in order to expose, our government. Oh my goodness! But although you can say though, Chicago does not have the best record. Yeah. PD, honestly, they don't have the best record, honestly, right now. So I don't know what he's trying to do here, but for me, I just think it's really wrong.
So here's the thing here's a couple of things that I always think are just super interesting right now when considering this case. So one, you've got a couple of guys that are so committed and so so frustrated at Jesse, and they know him. One, that they're able to identify him at 2 a.m. They've stalked him out, and apparently he's got a traditional pattern of going to Subway at 2 a.m., which is a very weird quirk, but I've got my own weird quirk, so I'm not going to judge them. two, they're able to identify him. I don't know. I've been in. I think my work hates me, and I think they passively aggressive do this because they send me to Chicago in the middle of winter. Both times they've sent me there. I think people that live in Chicago are far tougher than any other American simply because they endure Chicago winters. And when you go through that polar vortex, there's no part of me that wanted to be outside, much less waiting for somebody outside, much less being able to identify somebody because I'm completely covered head to toe. Like, you cannot tell. The only thing that you can see when I'm in the middle of winter, especially in a polar vortex in Chicago, you can only see my eyes because I'm trying to cover anything and everything because any type of wind is going to cut me like a paper cut. And so, like, I'm keenly aware of that. And then the idea that I'm not saying that there's not President Trump supporters in Chicago, but for President Trump supporters to also be MAGA, or to also be Empire fans, and then to also be in Chicago. So there's just a lot of things that are adding up. Now, here's where I think we can all agree on, though. And so I want to let this is the court of public opinion. It has no bearing whatsoever on the actual legal court. I would like to see this continue forward because he's put forward a false testimony before police. Does it help us understand the legal implications for that?
Yeah, if he filed an actual report and it can be proven that he was filing a false police report, then he's in legal trouble. Yeah,
I've heard I've heard jail time potentially could be a ruling for that. And again, thinking about budgetary constraints on especially some of these some local city governments, this is hundreds of man hours that was put into place by these local police officers as well as other clerks and administrators during that time. So I think that there needs to be some recompensance relative to that. And then on the flip side, though, I think we can all agree that we just need to slow down a little bit when it comes to these initial jump reactions. I think that's one of the things I get so frustrated by. It might be a conversation worthy of having after this break, because social media has programmed us to be able to demand a response immediately to some of these stories, and it goes contra to the biblical narrative to simply be quick to listen and slow to speak. Social media is beginning to influence and inculcate us to be the very opposite, right?
Exactly.
To be, which is very problematic. Right. And I'd love to hear from you. What do you think about the Jesse Smollett case, or just about this demand to want to react on social media? You can call in 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or you can jump on over to the Facebook page, Point of View, or facebook.com/Point of View Radio. You leave your question or comment online, and what you share online, we'll share over the radio. And so when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about this case, but I think the greater launching point is just about the need to be able to respond on social media. We'll be back right after this.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate two replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. We've got David Fraga and Lathan Watts of First Liberty here with us, and we have been talking a little bit about the Jussie Smollett story. For those of you that have been following along with this, what started off as just a local, again, the initial conception of this was the idea that it was a hate crime. That this was an individual that is an African American that identifies as homosexual. And he was going to a Subway shop in the middle of the polar vortex at 2 a.m. and was attacked and momped by two guys with a noose and told, "This is MAGA country." And so just based upon the initial facts from one side, we thought that this is easily a hate crime. And I think we can all agree, if those facts were verifiable and proven, this is despicable. Agree? We can all agree about that. Like that's just despicable. So we're not trying to demean that type of crime. But what we found out, though, as the days continued to pass, from a biblical perspective, what we all know to be true from Luke 8:17 is that all that is hidden in the dark will eventually come to light. And as more facts started to come to light, creatively told claims we began to see through those because the light began to illuminate that. We realized that there was not only more to the story, but the story we were told, the details were a little bit different. And so then what was initially reported as a hate crime online that caused certain presidential candidates like Senator Kamala Harris and Senator Cory Booker to say that this is a hate crime, this is a modern day lynching, have come out very strong against it. Now what we found out is that Smollett worked together with two guys that he had been connected with on the show, as well as just personally had worked together with them to stage this attack, it appears as though. And now there are instances where it appears as though that they're going to be moving forward with this, that he filed false verifiable claims, and there could be problems for him moving forward into the future. And so I think the larger conversation I'd like to have with you, Lathan, especially since you've got two kids that are very much in the social media world, and just because we're all connected with the social media world, is this idea that at the very beginning, the initial response of this was not just kind of reminds me of George Soros has this claim that he says, invest, then investigate, that we jump into it and believe it to be true. And then we've come to realize that a lot of these things, it was false, what we believed to be true at the very beginning. We saw this in the Covington Catholic School, the boys that were terrorized, or I don't want to say terrorized, the boys that were picked on with that viral video. And so help us, what are your thoughts when it comes to social media, especially moving on into the future, of how we might be able to utilize that and think about that, especially in light of this era in which, if it's not biased news, then it's fake news, it feels like.
Certainly, like any tool, it depends on how you use it.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, and social media is, it's ubiquitous in our society. It's not going away. So it becomes then, how do you, the individual user, use that tool, and how you relate to other people. The dangers you mentioned earlier is this, it cultivates this impulse to react quickly. Twitter especially is just an ongoing stream.
Yep.
It doesn't refresh. And so you're constantly just tossing more stuff into it to get whatever your thought is in front of people. And so that lends itself to, be first. Get out there and comment about this. And you combine that with, a 24-hour-a-day cable news cycle where you're trying to fill content for 24 hours a day. And so you see a lot of things on cable news and network news that are driven by the social media reaction to it. The story on the news is about the viral video, right? Well, if video didn't used to be viral, and let's remember, let's also keep in mind what a virus is. Right? It's not healthy.
I don't want a virus.
So the news cycle sometimes gets driven by what is in the social media space, and so then that contributes to it. And so it's a kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy almost. But that impulse to instantly react to things, and I think Twitter is worse about it than Facebook because of just the way Twitter operates. it leads to situations like this. And the danger of this continuing to happen is that the next time there actually is a real hate crime committed against someone, that the person who's the victim of that has a higher bar to establish credibility than they do right now, because people are going to rightly be skeptical about it because they've been burned by stuff like this before.
It's like the boy who cried wolf, right, David? Like eventually we cry, and then eventually when the wolf actually comes, no one believes that the wolf is here. So why does the wolf cry wolf in the first place? Because he wants attention a lot of times. And I feel as if going off what Lathan was saying, just these news, these people on Twitter, they're just going to throw out stuff and hoping it sticks. And then like, okay, we'll get the full context later as we go. But the attention's on them now, and it's no longer on, is this right or wrong? Yeah. So, man, that is the danger in social media so often, that it's just literally just throwing words out there, and we don't realize how powerful these words are, honestly. Yeah, I think one of the things, I'll speak up for media entities. In a shocking twist for some of our listeners, they're going to think, oh, here comes the closet liberal again. And it's not the case. I just want to try to think the best about the other side. And so here's what I think: we're in a brand new world, so we can't compare this to the 80s. We can't compare this to a bygone age, simply because, one, there were less gatekeepers, i.e. there were less places for these type of stories to be able to put out. And not only were there less places where these stories could be put out, there was less space for them to be put out. And so there was a morning paper, or there was a newspaper, or evening paper. There was a 30-minute segment for your news at the end of the day, or there wasn't the 24/7 I had. Right. There wasn't the incessant, the ridiculous amount of space and time to be able to fill up, and number of places to be able to fill up. And then with that, though, what we found is that there have been niches that have been created, because at the end of the day, what we need to remember is these simply aren't just organizations. They are organizations, but they're not simply organizations that are trying to disseminate information, but they're also organizations that are trying to make a dollar. And what we found, and this goes back to Fox News. What made Fox News so revolutionary is they realized that they don't have to target the entirety of the American project. What they can do is they can target a segment of the American project, and not necessarily feed it biased news or fake news, but feed it the news that they want to hear. And what we found now, and where we've experienced now, is that there's business models out there for news entities that are really targeted towards a particular group. And when things like this happen, it very much lends itself to a hysteria, one, but also to just a gullibility to a certain degree too, right? Yeah, it feeds into the notion of confirmation bias. Oh, yeah. There were two reactions probably to this story. People who want to believe it's true, like, of course that happened. Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is Trump's America. And then there are people on the other side of that going, there's no way that's true. Mm-hmm. This is just another hoax. Yeah. And so depending on where you get your news, and that's another thing about social media, because you create kind of your own filters. Oh, yeah. In social media. So you're not guaranteed to if you don't want to, you'll never hear the other side of a story. Yeah. I go to great lengths to keep in touch with people on social media that I know see things differently than I do. That people I went to school with, or, who are on different ends of a political spectrum than I am, because I know if I'm seeing things they post, I'm going to see another perspective on the exact same set of facts that I might not normally see. It's to a certain extent, it's not healthy for healthy probably isn't the right word for it. It doesn't help us fully develop our brain. Like, it's like the ghettoization of your brain, I think, is a phrase that David French utilized. It's this idea, if I'm only arguing and only talking to people that believe the large part of what I believe, I start building in assumptions, and then and as you know, from a law standpoint, you have to articulate those assumptions when you're making an argument, because A plus B plus C gets you to D. And when you start at B, it doesn't necessarily make its way all the way to D. Or when you skip C, it doesn't. That's just an assumption that you've got to articulate in order to get to the desired end of D. So you might already believe D, but you've got to be able to articulate those points leading up to it. And especially with this, it's not just confirmation bias, but the other concept that we need to be cognizant of is the selective exposure. Like if you're only getting your news from CNN, if you're only getting your news from Fox News, then you have a selective exposure. Because I do think that there's benefit to seeing the other side.
Absolutely.
I think it's important to be able to understand the framework by which the other side paints it. But I think it's important to be able to see the other side as well, just for the full development. But nevertheless, we've got to go to a break right now. I apologize. I've run into this again. And so when we come back from the break, we'll continue talking about this. I'm interested in the pragmatic standpoint. So I'm going to have David talk to us a little bit about the pragmatic. What are steps that we can begin to take relative to social media? What are steps we can take relative to the consumption of news to help us better understand and arrive at the truth? We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Sometimes the substantial burden on a person's religious exercise comes literally to the steps of the Supreme Court. The U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia recently dismissed a lawsuit alleging that preventing anti-war activists from demonstrating outside the Supreme Court violated the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. The activists noted in their complaint that as a post-denominational Christian and unity Christian, their religious beliefs compel protest against war. They insist on living out their spirituality through prayer vigils and peace walks, sometimes on the Supreme Court's steps. Interestingly, the court never questioned the sincerity of their beliefs, no matter how odd they may seem. Nevertheless, the court determined that RFRA did not protect their religious acts of protest. Why? Because the rule restricts, quote, only one of a multitude of means by which plaintiffs could engage in their religiously motivated activity, unquote. According to their own words, the steps of the Supreme Court are not the only place in which to exercise their beliefs. It's just one of the places they exercise their beliefs. So, while the rules might burden their religious exercise, it's not a substantial burden since there are many avenues left open to their religious exercise. RFRA provides broad protection to those who seek to exercise their religion, even when they attempt to do so in public. This case reminds us that RFRA correctly balances that right against the legitimate needs of government to govern. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Learn more and request a free In God We Trust window cling at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org and get your free In God We Trust window cling.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. So grateful that you have decided to join us on this day of February 20th, 2019. And for those of you that are subscribers to the Daily Briefing, you know that today is National Love Your Pet Day. And so for all of those individuals out there that have pets, please love your pet well. Lathan, is that you? Are you a pet guy?
2 dogs, 2 cats.
2 dogs. So how are you showing love to your pet today?
I showed some love to at least one of my dogs this morning who started whining at 4 a.m.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Because she was hungry, and I actually got up out of bed and fed her and did not yell at her for waking me up at 4 in the morning to get fed. So there's my my good deed for the day towards my pet. Exercise and patience and self-control as well.
Getting sanctified by a pet. Okay, David, National Love Your Pet Day. Do you have a pet one? Have you showed your pet love to help us understand this?
I don't. I don't have a pet, so it's good, man.
Well, I think you need to go out somewhere and love someone else's pet. It will be weird. You will get looked at kind of strangely. But just say it's National Love Your Pet Day, and I'm sure that they'll be
maybe get their permission.
Yeah,
first.
Maybe get their permission first. So okay, so we've been talking about social media, specifically this Jesse Smollett story that continues to reverberate. New allegations continue to come forward that what he said initially about a subway hate crime that happened in the middle of a polar vortex in the early morning hours on the way back from a subway. Didn't turn out to be true, but rather it seems as though it's an orchestrated hoax to be able to advance this idea that Trump's inciting this anger and this hatred towards the other side, towards minorities. And what we found is it's not true at all. But if we only believed what we saw on social media, then we might believe that was true. But now we have individuals that are trying to walk back their claims. And so I'm interested in the bigger picture. And so, David, I'm putting the question towards you right now. What can we do? What are steps that we can take? Do we just need to completely get rid of social media? If we stay engaged with social media, how do we develop a healthy relationship that doesn't jump to conclusions? Because when we jump to conclusions, we end up in a puddle of mess. It's like what we found ourselves in right now.
Honestly, I don't think, not being in social media is the answer.
Okay.
It's kind of like, there's going to be hurt out there, but since that's so influential, how can we, as the body of Christ, be a good influence there? At the same time, that is, part of the world, part of just like, it's so easy to be entangled with that stuff. But I would honestly say, just be careful who you follow. There's a lot of practical steps. Everyone has their own ways. Man, I even have friends that fast from it. They're like, oh, social media fast, and I think we talked about that previous weeks and such, like people who have to announce that, Yeah. But it's really interesting because for me personally, I think some steps that I always take is, first of all, I'm really careful who I follow. You have to be, because if you're just following everyone, the top people, they're gonna always express their opinions and things like that. Now, when you see something like this come out and other people are posting their opinions, I always say, that's very interesting, like in my head, right? Yeah. And I always want to see the bigger picture because at the end of the day, I'm going to be accusing someone. Oh, someone's to blame for this, right? And you can't receive that. You can't allow that to just manifest, right? Otherwise, how are we supposed to be loving as believers, right? That is not loving. That is judgmental. That is very harsh. And so I think discernment is a huge part of this. Discernment comes from experiences, and just discerning whether you should, past a certain time limit, do you need to still be on social media like an hour a day or whatever that looks like? And then on top of that, what does your community say? What is people who you look up to that are trustworthy? Yeah. So I think those are the biggest things that I would do personally.
And Latham, what say you, man?
I agree with what David said. You have to, if nothing else, it can be a really good exercise in critical thinking. Yeah. And any skill that you don't use, you will lose. Yeah. You have to understand the way, depending on what social media you're engaged in, the way it operates. The way Twitter is just kind of a constant stream versus the filters that are in Facebook, and how for a lot of us, social media, if you're in any form of the communications business, like I am for First Liberty, it's a tool of our work. And so, we have to be very careful in how we do it. We have to watch, who is following us, and who we're following as an organization. We cannot, we lose credibility if we react quickly to something, especially if there's a temptation, as we said before, to react to everything.
Oh, yeah.
You know, we're very mission driven. You know, if it's not impacting religious liberty, that's somebody else's job.
Yeah.
You know, that's not what we're here for. So, I mean, we could probably generate a lot more followers and get a lot more attention if we were out commenting on, you know, literally everything in social media. But that's not our mission. You know, our mission is related to protecting religious liberty for all Americans. If there's a religious liberty angle to something and it justifies us commenting on it, yes, you'll see us do that. But being selective, reading critically, understanding how the entity itself operates and what that looks like. You know, all good points that David brought up that I would say amen to. You know, you are known by the company that you keep.
Yeah.
And in this day and age, you know, especially for people younger than me that are like entering the job market, you should know. Yeah. That's one of the first things that potential employer is going to check. Yeah, it's going to be your social media. Yeah. You know, and the internet is forever. Just because you deleted it does not mean it won't be found.
Yeah. So true. Yeah, it's like a breadcrumb that never goes stale, right? Like it's it literally is just going to be able to point back to everything that you've ever done, and that information is all knowable. One of the things that I always found really helpful is I think there's just this. And you can call it naivete if you want. I just want to believe the best about everybody. Sure. And I think that there's probably a naivete to it, but there's also, to a large degree, I just want to think that even though I disagree with them, I'm willing to at least entertain the idea that they want the best, whatever that issue is. And then I'm trying to think back then from them seeing that that's the best. How does their thinking get them to that particular point? And so that's so then I can argue with particular components of it rather than just simply demonizing it.
Right. And, you know, I always tell even our clients when we're working on a case for them, we usually caution them, you know, social media is not going to be your friend.
No.
And, you know, one of the things I always tell them is no one has ever won a social media argument.
Yeah, no.
On either side.
It's like wrestling. It's like wrestling in the mud with a pig, man.
You are not going to win.
Experience,
you're not going to convince that other person.
Yeah.
You can understand where you can gain some understanding of where they're coming from, maybe. Yeah. But the chances of you converting this person from a militant atheist to a religious liberty warrior because you responded to their comment on Facebook, and you were even snarkier than they were, slim and none.
Yeah. I think that was one of the things, especially when I look through this. So we'll talk the Smollett case, for example. Smollett, like I think we can all agree, regardless of wherever we come down on now, what appears as though is an orchestrated hoax by Smollett. We can all agree that hate crimes are bad. We can all agree that someone should not be discriminated. Someone should not be that acts of violence should not be perpetuated and acted upon by individuals just because of their sexuality or because of the color of their skin. I think we can all agree with that. And so understanding that base root value and being able to come to a common agreement with that, I think you can win a lot of points when you consider social media and how you might engage with that. And two, that helps you to be able to understand them as well. But we got to go take a break. And when we come back from the break, we're going to talk with Jonathan Merritt from The Atlantic. We'll be back right after this.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View on this Wednesday, February 20th, 2019 day. My name is Nick Pitts. So grateful that you've decided to join us for this second hour for our Dallas and a Minnesota audience. For the first hour nationwide, we are so thankful that you've decided to spend a little bit of time here with us on Point of View at the Millennial Roundtable. Today, we've got quite a few stories that we'll be talking about. One, we're going to lead off talking about the controversy within the Southern Baptist Convention, as earlier this week there's been news about some new initiatives that have been moving forward relative to kind of some of the sexual abuse crisis that the Southern Baptist finds itself embroiled in. And so we'll be joined by Jonathan Merritt over the phone here shortly to talk about his article in The Atlantic, which dropped today, that talks about some of the lessons that can be learned for Southern Baptists during this time as well. We'll also be talking a little bit about this self-made myth. There was a fascinating article in Harper's Bazaar magazine about the idea of how there's so many facets, as well as there's so many contributing sources for millennials, and the value of family, and seeing how family contributes to millennials and in turn allows millennials to be able to achieve great levels of success. But in this age of disparity and kind of what some would consider significant inequality, which I would combat against a little bit, what we see is that there's almost a level of guilt for having parents that are supporting you. And so we'll talk a little bit about that as well. But joining me here around the Millennial Roundtable today, we've got the all-star cast, if I do say so myself. I'm completely biased like certain news organizations, but nevertheless, that's where I'll keep my bias, just simply when commenting on my co-host. And so we've got David Fraga here. David, how are you today?
Doing great, man.
So good to have you here. And then we've also got Lathan Watts of First Liberty Institute. Lathan, how are you?
Good.
Gearing up. I hear you all are going to D.C. here pretty shortly.
That we are. A week from today, actually, oral argument in front of the Supreme Court. Defending the Bladensburg World War I Memorial on behalf of our client, the American Legion.
Okay.
So next week will be a huge week in the history of our firm, and we're hoping will be a big week in the history of religious liberty in this country, based on this oral argument next week.
So give our listeners a little background information on this Bladensburg case, because again, it's pretty significant. We talked a little bit about it during the first hour, but I think it'd be helpful for us to understand the context of it, some of the pertinent details in it, and then the significance moving forward.
Certainly. So the Bladensburg World War I Veterans Memorial was constructed by mothers in Bladensburg, Maryland, right outside of D.C., who lost their sons in World War I, so nearly 100 years ago. They were assisted in the effort by the American Legion, our client, and to honor the American Legion for their help, they feature the seal of the American Legion in the center of the memorial. Now, the memorial has been there, as I said, for nearly 100 years, but in the last few years, a couple of lawyers from the American Humanist Association drove by and became offended and filed a lawsuit to tear it down, because the memorial is in the shape of a cross and it sits on property that is maintained by the government, the Parks Commission in Maryland. Now, what the listeners need to understand, the mothers chose the shape of a cross for the memorial because at the time many of their sons were buried in Europe, and they wanted the memorial here to resemble the gravestones that their sons were buried under, not knowing at that time if their sons would ever be returned to America to be buried here. Some of them were, but at the time that they considered this memorial to be a makeshift gravestone for their sons. So that's why they chose that shape. It does sit on property that is maintained by the government. Originally, it was not. But the government took control of the property when they were expanding a highway in that area. Ironically enough, I believe the name of the highway is the Veterans Memorial Highway. But the highway literally curves around the monument so as not to disturb this monument to honor these 49 men from Prince George's County, Maryland. So we won this lawsuit at the district court level, and the American Humanists Association appealed to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. The Fourth Circuit ruled in favor of the American Humanists Association in a 2-1 decision with a very strong dissent, which we then appealed to the United States Supreme Court. Thankfully, the United States Supreme Court agreed to hear the case, and so oral argument will be next week on Wednesday. And it's important for a lot of reasons, not just for preserving this memorial, which is one of the earliest World War I memorials in the country, one of the first ones constructed in the country, but also Arlington National Cemetery is within the Fourth Circuit. So if the Supreme Court did not overrule the Fourth Circuit, the American Humanist Association or other groups like them could take this decision from the Fourth Circuit and march into Arlington National Cemetery. Mm-hmm. Well, the Canadian Cross of Sacrifice now has to come down, and the Argonne Cross of Sacrifice now has to come down. While we're at it, let's go over to the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, which, if you know the inscription, here lies in honor, glory, and American known but to God. Well, let's sandblast the word God off the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier while we're at it. So there are far-reaching implications just for memorials in this country. But one of the things we're attempting to do with this case is not just preserve those memorials, but also we're asking the court to return to the original text of the First Amendment and shift how they analyze cases like this to a standard that's much easier to understand by lower court judges and by the general public, which is rooted in the text of the First Amendment, which basically prohibits the government from coercing you to worship a certain way or compelling you to support state-approved religion. That's what the Establishment Clause is really about. So that could be the even broader implications of this case should the court, in their decision on this case, accept that argument that we're making.
That's fascinating. So help us to understand this, because I think that was one of the things I was so interested in, is this idea of the lemon test, is what you were talking about during the first hour. Because what we've known to be true within this particular court over this recent stretch is that their rulings are very tight. They're very specific in their orientation and kind of actionable, I guess you would say. So help us to understand this lemon test that you all are seeking to better.
Right. So the term lemon test comes from a case called Lemon versus Kurtzman, where the court announced this way of analyzing these types of issues. And frankly, the lemon test has contributed to more confusion than it ever clarified. As I said, lower court judges are inconsistent in how they apply it. Even the Supreme Court itself has sometimes applied it, sometimes not. It has contributed to confusion out there in the general public, people that have to deal with issues like this, as to how to deal with them. So that's why we are suggesting, I don't want to say that it's a new test, because it's really the original test. It's rooted in the text of the First Amendment, but a different way of analyzing these as compared to Lemon, which would be a much easier standard to apply, which is, have you been coerced to worship? Have you been compelled to support the government's preferred religion or church or faith or whatever it is? And if not, then whatever the controversy is does not violate the Establishment Clause.
Yeah, so this is more than simply just a cross that is in memorial to some soldiers that lost their lives. This has implications that reach into the tentacles of all throughout the American experiment. And so grateful that you all are going to be up there. But we've got to take a break right now. But when we come back from the break, we're going to be joined by Jonathan Merritt over the phone. Jonathan has a new article out at The Atlantic, The Lessons Baptists Need to Learn from the recent scandal and crisis that continues to plague them relative to sexual abuse. We'll be talking with Jonathan here shortly, but we've got to take a break. But when we come back, more from Point of View, and specifically the Millennial Roundtable. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
The editorial board of the Wall Street Journal asked a good question the other day. They wondered who's afraid of socialism. Their argument was that the new progressive agenda looks like government control over the means of production. Isn't that the textbook definition of socialism? The president has been criticized for saying that there are new calls to adopt socialism in this country, but Democrats in Congress and pundits in the media have protested that the socialist label doesn't apply to them. So the editors decided to take a look at a few of the items on the agenda. Medicare for All is one example. Senator Bernie Sanders and 16 other senators proposed a program that would replace all private health insurance with a federally administered single-payer health care program. The government would decide what care you would receive, what to pay doctors and hospitals, and even which drugs would be on the formulary. That sounds like socialized medicine. The Green New Deal is also on the progressive agenda. Nearly 4 dozen House Democrats and several Democratic presidential candidates have endorsed the plan. As I've written about in a previous commentary, it requires the country to be carbon neutral within 10 years. This will not happen, but even the attempt would require a massive amount of government intrusion into all of our lives. That really looks like socialism. To pay for these and other progressive agenda items, proponents call for a level of taxation never seen before. Democratic candidates are talking about everything from a 70% tax rate on higher incomes to a wealth tax on assets in this country, as well as those held abroad. This tax scheme also looks like socialism. We all know the phrase, if it looks like a duck and walks like a duck, it is a duck. Politicians and the media can protest that the socialist label doesn't apply. Most of us know that it does. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From roadside attractions, Run the Race. Two brothers share an unbreakable bond, but life's unexpected adversities put their future in question. Run the Race, rated PG, in theaters February 22nd.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable by David Fraga, as well as Latham Watts. And we have over the phone with us Jonathan Merritt, a contributing writer at The Atlantic, senior columnist for Religious News Service. Jonathan, how are you today?
I am doing well. How are you doing, Nick?
I cannot complain. I don't know if it'd do me any good if I did anyway, but so grateful that you decided to join us today. And you've got a new article out, and so we were talking to our listeners a little earlier before the break about some of the controversy that's been surrounding the Southern Baptist Convention lately. And your new article in the Atlantic kind of spells out some of the lessons that potentially could be learned from Southern Baptists that they need to learn because of this. And just to paint a contextual picture for our listeners, and probably have been following along with this, the Houston Chronicle, as well as the San Antonio Express, over the past couple of weeks released a series of articles that really did investigative reporting relative to some of the sexual abuse that's been hidden and covered over within Southern Baptist churches, specifically in the Texas area. Upwards of 700 victims were identified. Over 200 individuals had been perpetrators, had been just evildoers, I would say, individuals that really were doing harm, and all the church was sheltering a large part of this or hiding a large part of this. And so, Jonathan, tell us a little bit about your article as well in reaction to some of the news that's been reported over the past couple of weeks relative to the Southern Baptist Convention.
Yeah, so as you say, Nick, this is huge. Mm-hmm. It is. It's going to end up, I think, being one of the biggest religion news stories of the year. It's not quite as big as the Catholic sex abuse scandal, at least not yet, because it's not as broad in scope. And of course, the hierarchical differences between the Southern Baptist Convention and the Catholic Church make it somewhat less devious. But it is still very, very bad. But what I was trying to do in this article is really to point out that Southern Baptists aren't the first ones to be forced to walk down this path. You know, it was 17 years ago that the Boston Globe broke the story on the Catholic sex abuse crisis, and that's continued to kind of come out. You know, it's like water torture. It's still coming out. And so what I tried to argue in this piece is that what Southern Baptists can do, what Southern Baptists should do, what I'm not sure that Southern Baptists will do, is to look at the failings, massive failings, of the Catholic Church that have cost them dearly, and now to take it upon themselves to do better so that they can actually survive this scandal.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that you point out, especially in your article. You mentioned the Pew Research relative to kind of the drop of Catholic attendees here in the U.S. by 3 million over the past few years, since 2007. That's one of the things that I think is a differentiating factor, though, that you point to, and I think it's important. So help us understand, especially because you have so much expertise within the Southern Baptist culture and life, and so help us understand the hierarchical nature difference between the Catholic Church as well as the Southern Baptist Church.
Yeah, so this is critical. And actually, if you read a lot of mainstream media reporting coming out of this, I would say that most reporters I've seen have not done a good job adequately sussing out the differences. So the Catholic Church is a hierarchical denomination. Everything sort of traces back to Rome. Everybody has a boss who has a boss who has a boss who has a boss until you get to the Pope. So if a priest exists in a particular community, at a particular parish, they were placed there by somebody. And if someone is upset about something that priest does, it's reported to a bishop, and then a bishop has to make a decision about what to do with that person. So what we had with the Catholic Church, and what we're now seeing with the Catholic Church in places like Washington, D.C. and Pennsylvania, is that the leadership was complicit when they had these crimes reported in sifting people around and covering them up. The Southern Baptist Convention is not at all like that. In fact, some people say it's not even technically a denomination because it is a collective, a voluntary gathering of autonomous churches. So if you report something to that church, there is no bishop. There's no hierarchy that stretches back to the Pope. The Southern Baptist Convention doesn't have a central authority that has, you know, any ability to do anything, to meddle in the life of Southern Baptist churches. So even though the Southern Baptist denomination failed on many fronts, particularly failing to create a database of sex offenders in their churches despite pleas from their membership, and I think that this looks very, very bad for them. You're not going to find the same complicity that you have in the Roman Catholic Church that will dirty the hands of Southern Baptist leaders at quite the same level as Roman Catholics.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really great point relative to kind of the database. So, one of the more stinging indictments that came out of I'll say, that came out of the Boston Globe reporting 17 years ago was the idea that there was a structure that was put into place not only internally but externally to move these priests that had these abuse instances in their past to different parishes, but then to cover it up too and keep it from the larger public. One of the differentiating factors of what we see with Southern Baptists is that there isn't that individual that's moving pastors, that's moving youth ministers around. So it's kind of like the Wild West, which raises the question, and this is one of the questions that I think that you do raise, either, I don't know if it's directly or indirectly in the article, is what can be done, right? I think one of the things that you did bring up was the idea that they did try to create a database, I think 10 plus years ago or some years ago, but that was failed. That motion failed. So help us to understand, one, what can be done, especially because of the wildness West nature of Southern Baptist life, but two, what needs to be done.
Yeah, so you're the biggest thing, kind of on the front lines of this, the biggest issue at play is the database. So Southern Baptists asked the convention, they said, look, abuse is real, abuse is happening. Look what's happening to the Catholic Church. It's happening among our ranks too. We need a database that churches will be compelled to participate in, that if there's a credible allegation of abuse, they report it to the central body, to the executive committee in Nashville. It's put in a database, and then if that person comes to apply for a job at your church, their name pops up. You see that there's an issue. The Southern Baptist Convention studied this. They came back. and they said, "We're sorry, but we have no power to do this, to meddle in the affairs of congregation." Now, this is sort of a dubious claim, because if you know much about the Southern Baptist Convention, you know, for example, if you ordain women or if you perform a gay marriage, there are repercussions. They say, "We're sorry, you cannot participate with us. That violates our beliefs." So Southern Baptists are already determining upon which criteria they're going to allow churches to participate. So it doesn't seem like it would be difficult at all to say, if you want to participate with our churches, with our denomination, you are going to have to comply with reporting to this database. And if it is found that you have in any way mishandled sex abuse, you will no longer be allowed to cooperate with Southern Baptists. This is not a difficult thing, and this is one of the recommendations, because right now, as we speak, President of the SBC, J.D. Greer, who's a pastor out of North Carolina, is meeting with the executive committee. Mm-hmm. He has already made some recommendations, including the establishment of a database. And I'll tell you, some people that I'm hearing inside that meeting, it's not going too well for J.D. Greer. There is a lot of pushback from the old guard in the SBC, and it remains to be seen whether or not they will actually do this. I think if they don't, it's going to be very, very bad news for Southern Baptists.
So it's very interesting, just because, especially out of the initial reporting from the Houston Chronicle and the San Antonio Express, there's one instance and one individual where we saw an individual that had committed sexual abuse at his church as a youth pastor, and then had gone to another Southern Baptist church. And that just shows how much can be captured relative to a background check. Because I know some of our listeners right now are saying, well, our church runs background checks. Well, background checks aren't going to catch everything. And so that just continues to accentuate the need for a database. But like you said, the database has to go through a convention. The database has to go through a vote. So help us give our listeners an understanding of what has to happen and what are the arguments against the database.
Yeah, so there are actually a couple of things. They argue that in order to establish a database, they would have to reorganize, which means they would have to basically amend their polity, their structure, in order to allow them to interfere and to compel churches to participate in a certain way. Now, they can't do that until they meet in Birmingham, Alabama for their annual gathering this summer. I think that's a recommendation that will come forward. I don't know if it will happen. There are some other things that have already happened. The 6 Southern Baptist seminaries, for example, have now made a commitment to begin training pastors on how to be reporters of crimes like this, how to handle it. You know, I went to a Southern Baptist seminary. I believe you did too. Mm-hmm. I don't think that I ever heard a conversation about how to handle a sexual abuse allegation even one time in the 3 years that I was getting my Master of Divinity. Yeah. And so pastors are not equipped for this. They're not prepared for this, and this is at crisis levels. And so I think the seminaries doing that's going to be a big step forward. They don't have to amend any documents to do that. Requiring a background checks, which, as you said, is already really a pretty low bar. Yeah. In order to ordain someone, that's important as well. So we'll see what happens at the annual meeting.
We will see what happens. We've got to jump to a break, but when we come back, more with Jonathan Merritt. We'll be back right after this.
Question: do you have a health insurance plan you are not happy with? Well, Bethany and Jason thought they were stuck. Their plan just kept getting more expensive, and Bethany's favorite doctor didn't even take that plan anymore. And then some friends at church told them about MediShare.
With our previous insurance, we were paying $1,200 a month. With MediShare, we now pay around $600 a month.
Yes, they're paying $600 less per month, and that's a pretty typical savings with MediShare. And they actually like MediShare more.
I was able to go back to my original doctor that I absolutely loved, and it's just been an absolutely beautiful thing being a part of MediShare.
Yeah, so they pay a lot less, and they like it more. No wonder MediShare is growing so fast. Find out more. They're super easy to talk to. All you have to do is call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined by David Fraga and Latham Watts of the First Liberty Institute here in studio. And then we've got Jonathan Merritt over the phone. Jonathan has just recently penned, I guess earlier today, came out and published on The Atlantic, The Lessons Southern Baptists Need to Learn. And so in the previous segment, we were talking a little bit about the scandal that's kind of the crisis, would probably be the better word for it, the crisis that's happening within Southern Baptist Convention based on some of the reporting that happened over the past really 18 years, or the reporting that happened just over the past year from the Houston Chronicle as well as the San Antonio Express, upwards of 700 victims of sexual abuse by over 200 to 300 of individual Southern Baptist leaders and pastors and youth ministers and various ministers, et cetera, et cetera. Jonathan Merritt is joining us over the phone right now in New York. Jonathan's been in your article, one of the things that you entertain is this idea of a database. What we've always known to be true is just kind of the insufficiency of a background check, that it's not able to catch everything. But there's also been, so it just makes sense, well, then why don't you have this database that's able to, one, to store some of these instances to be able to identify these individuals so that another church won't hire them if they've already been caught in kind of the negative kind of some of this evil that they've perpetuated within their church. And so help us, Jonathan, to be able to understand what are some of the arguments that you're hearing for against this database and maybe for this database.
Well, there are two kind of primary arguments that are being made. One's kind of institutional and one's legal. So the institutional one we talked about before is that the SBC has no power to do this. The idea is that accountability can be sacrificed on the altar of autonomy. And I think that that's a specious argument. I don't think it holds up. The Nashville denomination, as we mentioned, already removes congregations for a range of reasons, but apparently protecting minors from sexual abuse doesn't rise to that level, or at least has not up to this point. The other one is a legal argument, which is essentially once you take this on, you assume a level of liability. If a repeat crime, for example, happens and you didn't store it correctly in the database, if it wasn't entered correctly, that now all of a sudden there are crimes that may be happening and you are in some way involved in educating your people to prevent that crime. And if you don't do a good job, you could be legally liable. I think that's a very difficult case to make as well. Number one, laws in America revolving around churches and how they operate are a little bit fuzzy. Houses of worship are difficult to sort of manage in terms of tort law. So I think that would be something that would have to be tested. But I think you also have to look at the Roman Catholic Church to say there is an overwhelming liability to not having a database like this. The Catholic Church has paid out billions with a B in settlements to victims of sexual abuse because they did not do their due diligence. And the Diocese of Dallas, for example, in 1998 alone, in your city, the diocese paid out to 12 victims $30.9 million in settlements in one city for one priest with 12 victims. So there is a massive liability that is involved with not developing this database that I think outweighs any potential legal liability that might come with developing it.
Yeah. So Lathan, help us understand, because from a legal standpoint, I think Jonathan brings up a really great point in that there is, to a certain degree, there is some liability that comes. And so help us to understand the legal background on understanding on having a database, but then too, what are some of the connections that churches need to be aware of relative to that?
Right. Well, he mentioned, the fact that if you create this and then it doesn't work in some instance, that you are, the argument is you're opening yourself to liability. The difference that he's also pointed out in the structure of the Catholic Church versus the Southern Baptist Church. So if that happened, the question would be, okay, so who is financially responsible? Is it the individual church where this happened, or is it the overall Southern Baptist Convention? Are you going to go after every Baptist church in America for something that happened at the Baptist church down the street from you? I think a lot of this, the first thing that I noticed when I read his article and the one that you sent us for today was the term credible allegation, because there's also a potential, depending on how you define that, excuse me, I think there's also potential for litigation down the road if it's only based on an allegation, and later that allegation turns out not to be true, and somebody is eventually going to sue to have their name taken out of the database, or if they show that they didn't get hired because of a false allegation, you're potentially looking at litigation both ways. Yeah. Whether it's it happened and you didn't stop it, or it didn't happen and you did put the name in the database. So a lot of that needs to be analyzed probably by lawyers smarter than me. Yeah, but it's definitely worth considering.
But I think, Jonathan, and you've been following this story pretty closely, especially what's happened over the past couple of days during their executive session. One of the things that I've been so impressed relative to J.D. Greear, and again, he might be I don't know if he's in the minority in this position. I don't know if he's in the majority in this position. But what he continues to bring about, what he continues to put at the forefront is the idea of placing an emphasis upon the safety of children, and that the church needs to be a place where there is safety of children. And so I know that there's a variety of different arguments that are being made right now. And I know the characteristic that is chief among Southern Baptists is this idea of autonomy, of having their own wherewithal and freedom to be able to operate however they deem fit based upon the scriptures. So that there is, to a certain degree, there's some value in saying that the leader of the Southern Baptist Convention is placing such an emphasis upon the safety of children. Agree?
Yeah, there's a great statement that was made by an old filmmaker who says if you've got a problem in the third act, there's really a problem in the first act. Mm-hmm. That where you begin often determines your trajectory. I think what Southern Baptists are going to have to do now is really determine what do they prioritize. Mm-hmm. Because if you begin the argument at the place of autonomy, you will end the argument somewhere else than if you begin the argument with protecting children. Mm-hmm. And so the SBC is going to have to determine is autonomy of the local church the hill on which they will die, the hill on which countless children will be victimized? Or is this issue of sexual abuse and protecting innocent children from sexual offenders who are employed by or volunteering at churches important enough to plant your flag there and come hell or high water, accept whatever difficulties and liabilities may come, and say, it will not happen on our watch if we can prevent it? I think that is the only route that Southern Baptists have in this case. They have been in a massive decade-long decline with membership and with baptisms. And if the Catholic sex abuse scandal is a cautionary tale, and I believe it is, if they fail to protect these children, they are heading not for revolution, but for irrelevancy in the 21st century.
Oh, that's fascinating. Yeah. But I think one of the things that I can take heart in, though, is, again, I think you do a good job in your article of painting this, and especially in some of your comments that you've made over air right now, is the idea that it's not just one person that's making this decision. This is thousands upon thousands of individuals that are representing churches all across the country that are having to come together. Someone's got to put forward a resolution, and not only has to put forward a resolution, but then the majority has to vote in favor of said resolution for some of these instances. But what I can take heart in, and this is and come back against me if you need to on this, I can take heart in, because we saw one of the churches that was put forward last night or 2 nights ago was Second Baptist Church in Houston, Texas, which is a significant and a very influential church, especially with their senior pastor, Ed Young, that if they're willing to put that name out there of entertaining the idea of disfellowship for that church, it shows of some level of seriousness from the leadership. Wouldn't you say so?
Well, here's one thing I've learned from a lifetime being in the SBC. Of course, my dad was president of the Southern Baptist Convention, as was Ed Young Sr. at Second Baptist Houston. When all is said and done with Southern Baptist, more is often said than done. So I'm not often persuaded by the words that come from Southern Baptist until I see the works that come from Southern Baptist. I doubt that Second Baptist Houston is going to be disfellowshipped. There are too many members, and there's too much money. I don't know that any major church is going to be disfellowshipped at this point. I doubt that very seriously. I think what happens in these kinds of situations is that factions mobilize, particularly around power structures and megachurch pastors. People say things get heated. But what we really have to do is see what is actually going to be done by Southern Baptists. And I think that is a giant question mark right now with incredible implications for the future of the denomination.
Well, Jonathan Merritt, thank you so much for joining us today on Last Minute. Phenomenal article. Really do appreciate some of your insight. And for our listening audience, you'll be able to catch that article. You can go to the Point of View website, pointofview.net, or you can go to the Atlantic website as well. Jonathan, thank you so much. We'll be back, though, right after these messages.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Sometimes the substantial burden on a person's religious exercise comes literally to the steps of the Supreme Court. The U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia recently dismissed a lawsuit alleging that preventing anti-war activists from demonstrating outside the Supreme Court violated the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. The activists noted in their complaint that as a post-denominational Christian and unity Christian, their religious beliefs compel protest against war. They insist on living out their spirituality through prayer vigils and peace walks, sometimes on the Supreme Court's steps. Interestingly, the court never questioned the sincerity of their beliefs, no matter how odd they may seem. Nevertheless, the court determined that RFRA did not protect their religious acts of protest. Why? Because the rule restricts, quote, only one of a multitude of means by which plaintiffs could engage in their religiously motivated activity, unquote. According to their own words, the steps of the Supreme Court are not the only place in which to exercise their beliefs. It's just one of the places they exercise their beliefs. So, while the rules might burden their religious exercise, it's not a substantial burden since there are many avenues left open to their religious exercise. RFRA provides broad protection to those who seek to exercise their religion, even when they attempt to do so in public. This case reminds us that RFRA correctly balances that right against the legitimate needs of government to govern. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Learn more and request a free In God We Trust window cling at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org and get your free In God We Trust window cling.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined by Latham Watts as well as David Fraga. We've been talking a little bit about the Southern Baptist Convention right now, some of the efforts that are being made. And, you know, Latham, I think we can, one, this is just an undesirable position. Two, it's not, this. I don't think this is a time for us to try to excuse some of the behavior. Jonathan mentioned it, I come from a Southern Baptist church. I work at a Southern Baptist institution at the Dallas Baptist University. I lead up the Institute for Global Engagement there. And so very much this feels like it just feels bad. And I'm heartbroken over it. And so there's no part of me that wants to defend anything and that doesn't want to, I don't want to defend the entity. I want to repent for my part in it, because the church, we rejoice with those who rejoice, we mourn with those who mourn. And so there's a large degree that I just want to understand my part in this, but also what are some of the steps we can take moving forward. And so Jonathan kind of outlined and really advocated in our interview was for the idea of a database. What some of the other things that the executive committee has been putting forward over the past couple of days is this idea of everything from curriculum to be put into place within churches, of certain leadership training that's coming into place right now. There are certain steps that are being taken, and I want to say that the steps being taken are indicative of a repentance component, but I just don't know what else needs to be done or if the things that are being done are going to be fruitful.
Right. I mean, there's no easy answer to this. Certainly, it has been exposed as the government Atlantic mentioned. There are lessons you can learn from what happened within the Catholic Church. But we also have to kind of consider our earlier conversation about being too quick to react. I'm not saying that the SBC is reacting too quickly, because there's no such thing as reacting too quickly to abuse of a child. Yeah. But you also have to consider long-term implications of the decisions that you're making. You don't want to, out of an emotional need, as you said, for repentance and to make this right, go down a path that has negative implications down in the future. You have to. There's a lot of things you have to consider. That's really only my only point in this. Is he mentioned a couple of the potential legal liabilities. That's certainly not more important than making sure that this doesn't happen again. Mm-hmm. But it's something that you have to consider. You do. It's just part of the conversation. Unfortunately, in a litigious society, it's always a factor.
You have to be shrewd as serpents, innocent as doves. You have to steward the resources well.
Yeah, exactly. Some of the work that we've done at First Liberty, we've helped churches and ministries sort of make sure their I's are dotted, T's are crossed for all sorts of situations, to make sure that they can carry out their ministry the way they want to carry it out, make sure that everything is done properly, and protect their rights to do so. This is certainly a subject area that I think any church in America, regardless of denomination, needs to be prepared to deal with. Mm-hmm. And that gets to the leadership of that church and having a plan, and some of the things you're talking about I think are good ideas. Training people on how to spot warning signs of something, before, we do it. I know a lot of school districts do it for teachers, to be able to, things that are common denominators, and to be able to spot warning signs of if you feel like a child may be, in an abusive situation, like what to look for. I think that, certainly could be applicable here. There's no silver bullet solution to it. It's going to be a combination of factors. And but it's definitely something that has to be addressed, not just by the Southern Baptist Convention. I mean, if you have a church and there are children there, you need to be ready to deal with this.
Yep, I completely agree. We're going to keep on opening up the phone lines as well. So if you'd like to call in with a comment on Southern Baptist Convention, some of the implications of what has happened, some of the recommendations of what needs to happen, you can call in 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. We're going to jump on over here in Texas. We've got Nancy on the line. Nancy, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hey, Nancy, what's your point of view?
My point of view is that I've been listening to your program on both sides of the issues, and I have a very strong Baptist church up the street, which my now 26-year-old went there for daycare, and I've kept my eye on them. How's it going? And they have added more pastors, and they watch very carefully how they are approached by people, and yet doing outreach as well, because I believe that sometimes people give them, or they go after them to see how they will fall, as well as for people who abuse children, because I know there was a young man there that I questioned in terms of what his relationship was with the kids in Awanas. And I thought, that I do not watch. I mean, I don't approve of what he's doing with them. And even when we went up in the summer up into New Mexico, I watched him very carefully when he was around the kids. Mm-hmm. And he's not there. He hasn't been there. And I'm sure there was something that was brought up and why he was let go. But I know even for the younger pastor, they're very careful on what kind of interaction people have with them without someone else in the room or with the door open.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that,
so
Nancy,
it's very positive.
Yeah, you've illuminated something that I think is, one, we're beginning to address, and I'm really encouraged, one, just because, like yourself, you just have congregants and individuals that are members of these Southern Baptist churches and just churches in general that are starting to take extra precautious measures relative to some of these things and just being more aware, which I think is really helpful. And then, David, I think one of the interesting things that we're starting to see, too, that's popping up in churches, I don't know if Gateway's done it here in Dallas that you're a part of, is they're starting to put in places like Ministry Safe, and there's certain organizations and entities that, again, understanding that a background check isn't going to catch everything, it's insufficient in and of itself, but there are some practices that can be put into place to not only, one, protect the children, but two, empower adults from individuals that don't want to protect the children.
Exactly. Yeah. So when I first started serving at Gateway Dallas over here, I think one of the biggest things they started doing is really getting to know who I was before allowing me to just want to serve with, student ministry, and then going through Ministry Safe. And then on top of that, just we always have meetings every single week before, obviously, we jump into, Wednesday nights and things like that. And we just talk about just, hey, be sure if you do have to go take someone home or something like that, you cannot be alone.
Yeah.
Like that's just period. You just aren't alone. Yeah. Even outside of this, you're just not.
Yeah.
Not even with consent of the parents. Like that's just something that you don't know. You can't control those things, and why put yourself in a position where even though I know my good old boy here, he's not going to do that. He's not going to fall or anything like that. It's still just man, we're still in this world where there's sin so relevant all around us. And man, it's just, why put yourself in that position too? Yeah. And then it all comes down to oh, he said, she said, just like we were talking about earlier, when the kid, when he's angry, or if he's angry at someone who's older, like a leader or something like that, then calling him out, man, you're going to believe the kid over the leader.
Yeah.
100%, 10 times out of 10 almost, unless you can prove yourself innocent, honestly.
Yeah. We find ourselves in a very interesting age, to say the least, but unfortunate one, but two, it's encouraging to see some of the individuals and entities that are starting to take some precautious measures and what some of those measures are. But we've got to come to a break right now. I've noticed the phone lines have started to light up a little bit, and so know that once we come back from the break, we're going to continue talking about the Southern Baptist Convention, some of the scandal that's happening around it, and so you can call in as well, 800-351-1212, 800-351-1212. Or leave a message on Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. We'll be back right after this.
Here's some great news. If you missed the deadline to sign up for health insurance, or more importantly, if you sign up for a plan that you're just not happy with, you still have a choice. It's called MediShare, and MediShare is a Christian healthcare sharing program. It's been around for 25 years. They have more than 400,000 members now around the country. And get this, over the years, MediShare members have shared more than $2 billion of each other's medical bills, so they could help share your needs too. And best of all, you could save a lot of money with MediShare. The typical savings for a family is around $500 a month. Your savings could be more or less, but think about what you could do with that extra money every month. So if you think you're stuck with a high-cost health plan that doesn't have much to offer, think again. You can join MediShare anytime, so call them today and check it out. There's no pressure. They're super easy to talk to. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, here for the third hour of Point of View, the Millennial Roundtable. If you have been tuning in the entirety of the show, please call in, please send a message, a pigeon, some forth. We need to give you a medal for how long you have tuned in. We are so grateful that you have decided to join us here for the third hour of Point of View Radio. We've been talking a little bit about everything from the Smollett case, the Jesse Smollett during the first hour, that individual that came out and said something along the lines of there was a hate crime that was perpetuated against him by individuals that chanted "This is MAGA country" simply because he was a African-American man that is identified as a homosexual. And now more stories are coming out, and the facts are coming out and emerging that this wasn't necessarily a hate crime, but it appears as though it was an orchestrated act. And for some unknown reason that we do not know, some are speculating the media jumped on this way too quickly before all the facts could be gathered. Others are pointing to the fact that potentially this could be Trump derangement syndrome, individuals overreacting to instances or to some of the actions and emotions and thoughts of President Trump. Regardless, we're going to continue to be a little bit more limited in how we might be able to respond, one, until all the facts are gathered, and the importance of that. We talked a little bit about that during the first hour. Second hour, we've been talking a little bit about the Southern Baptist Convention. Specifically, we had Jonathan Merritt, who's a contributor writer for The Atlantic, on to talk about his latest piece on what the Southern Baptist needs to learn from this, comparing it to the controversy that was happening in the Catholic Church. And then during the latter part of the hour, we talked about what are some of the next steps that can be taken relative to, one, the identification of some of this, the identification of the wrongs that are being perpetuated, and the measures that can be taken, too, to make sure that these wrongs don't happen again as well. And as we speak, Southern Baptist leadership is meeting today. They've been meeting earlier this week as well to be able to figure out next steps on that. But we've been talking about this, and I share the table today, the studio, with the one, the only, Lathan Watts of the First Liberty Institute. Lathan, how are you today?
I'm good. How are you? Thanks for having me.
So good, so good. And so, Lathan, we've been talking a little bit about this, and we've also been taking some phone calls from individuals about the controversy that is embroiling the SBC right now. And so we're going to continue taking some of those phone calls. So you can call in 800-351-1212. Again, 800-351-1212. And so we're going to jump on over to Hugh in South Carolina right now. Hugh, are you there?
Yes.
Hey, Hugh, what's your point of view?
I don't know what the requirements are for Southern Baptist ordained ministers to be confirmed and to maintain confirmation as a minister endorsed by the Southern Baptist. But it would seem to me that another alternative to approaching this issue is, I'm confident, as in my case, that the Southern Baptist ordained minister are required to endorse a certain theological position or positions. But if they can require them to endorse certain theological positions, can they not also require them to embrace certain, shall we say, cultural or other positions? My point being, cannot they require Southern Baptist ordained ministers, or whatever position they may be holding, to endorse a policy of mandatory dealing with and reporting to the convention headquarters or whatever, but dealing with an issue in their local congregation. And if they're not willing to do that, then they could not be endorsed as a Southern Baptist minister. And again, going back to the issue of maintaining that endorsement, that could also be applied to present pastors, ordained individuals who have not been had that requirement placed on them in the past, and at least and then involved in that, of course, is an educational process for them, which has already been addressed to some degree. But is there at present any mandatory action placed on ordained ministers within the Southern Baptist Convention to deal with these such situations as this with some degree of integrity?
Yeah, I completely agree. One of the things that I know would be the retort to an individual relative to the requirement of Southern Baptist pastors, or probably to a better degree Southern Baptist churches, would be that threatens the autonomy. One of the kind of key characteristics of Southern Baptists is this idea of church autonomy, that they're the ones that set the parameters. Everything from what Baptist faith and message do I adopt? Do I adopt the 1960, I think it's 63, it's either 1960 or 1963. I feel like I have failed as a Southern Baptist seminary student for not remembering that date. Or do I adopt the Baptist faith and message of 2000? And so there's a very low bar for requirements to be in the Southern Baptist Convention. Now, I do know that one of the key factors of what they do is individuals that are outside what they deem would be kind of orthodox. I guess orthodoxy would be the right word. I'm not quite sure what they would use for that word. Use in that instance, they've decided to disfellowship. And so those instances, and Jonathan talked about this in the previous hour, are entities and churches that are unwilling to kind of be within the framework of shared beliefs within Southern Baptist life. And so primarily that has been individual entities, churches that have been disfellowshipped from the Southern Baptist Convention have been those that have been either ordaining or supportive of homosexual activity, not orientation, but activity as well. And so you bring up a really great point, Hugh. Really appreciate it. And so we're going to jump over to one more call right now. We've got Mike in South Carolina right now. Mike, are you there?
Hey, yes, sir. Thank you so much. Hey, I've got a question for you concerning the President of the United States. Do you think they were a secret coup trying to throw the president out?
Man, Mike, thank you so much for your phone call. Here's the funny thing, Mike. I am a guy that this just shows you a little bit of my nerddom to a large degree. So I bucket list. It's taken from that idea of the bucket list from Morgan Freeman, that movie, that certain things you want to do before you kick the bucket. And one of the things that's on my bucket list, some people are like, I want to go skydiving. I want to go see the Northern Lights. I want to run with the Bulls. Well, my bucket list is I want to read a presidential biography on every president. So I'm kind of a nerd when it comes to presidential history. And I think one of the things that I've learned, especially I've read around 25, 26, I kind of take my time through them. I found if I read them continuously, then I won't really appreciate every president. So I skip around a little bit. But one of the things that I've always found to be true among presidents is each and every president is so very different. There's just certain influential factors. There's certain things that cause them to do certain things. And so it's just a fascinating thing. So thank you so much for your call, Mike. I really do appreciate it. And so we've got to jump out and take a commercial break right now. But when we come back from a break, maybe I'll talk a little bit more about Camelot's End that I just read about the duel between Jimmy Carter and Ted Kennedy during the 1980 Democratic primary. Probably won't. If I had to guess, we'll continue talking about Southern Baptist life, as well as an interesting article in Harper's Magazine relative to kind of this sense of entitlement and guilt among millennials relative to money from their parents. We'll be back, though, right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
The editorial board of the Wall Street Journal asked a good question the other day. They wondered who's afraid of socialism. Their argument was that the new progressive agenda looks like government control over the means of production. Isn't that the textbook definition of socialism? The president has been criticized for saying that there are new calls to adopt socialism in this country, but Democrats in Congress and pundits in the media have protested that the socialist label doesn't apply to them. So the editors decided to take a look at a few of the items on the agenda. Medicare for All is one example. Senator Bernie Sanders and 16 other senators proposed a program that would replace all private health insurance with a federally administered single-payer health care program. The government would decide what care you would receive, what to pay doctors and hospitals, and even which drugs would be on the formulary. That sounds like socialized medicine. The Green New Deal is also on the progressive agenda. Nearly 4 dozen House Democrats and several Democratic presidential candidates have endorsed the plan. As I've written about in a previous commentary, it requires the country to be carbon neutral within 10 years. This will not happen, but even the attempt would require a massive amount of government intrusion into all of our lives. That really looks like socialism. To pay for these and other progressive agenda items, proponents call for a level of taxation never seen before. Democratic candidates are talking about everything from a 70% tax rate on higher incomes to a wealth tax on assets in this country, as well as those held abroad. This tax scheme also looks like socialism. We all know the phrase, if it looks like a duck and walks like a duck, it is a duck. Politicians and the media can protest that the socialist label doesn't apply. Most of us know that it does. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From roadside attractions, Run the Race. 2 brothers share an unbreakable bond, but life's unexpected adversities put their future in question. Run the Race, rated PG, in theaters February 22nd.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. So grateful that you have decided to join us. We've got Latham Watts of the First Liberty Institute that's joining us on this February 20th, 2019 day, National Love Your Pets Day. And so, Latham, I'm going to give you a T-ball here. I'm going to put it up on a tee and let you hit it out of the park for our individuals and our listeners that are paying attention, that are pet lovers out there, that are cat people, that are dog people, that are gerbil people, that are hedgehog people, that are fish people. How did you show love to your pet today?
Well, it started out at about 4 o'clock this morning when one of my dogs woke up hungry and was whining for me to come downstairs.
That's
and,
a call
and
that
feed
you
her.
cannot. When nature calls and when the dog calls, that's a call you cannot miss.
I am incapable of ignoring the whimper of a dog, and they know that.
Yeah.
And the reason I know that they know that is because when I travel for work and I'm not there, my wife tells me they don't ever whine in the morning because they know I won't get out of bed. They only do this when you're here because they know you will get up no matter what time it is.
I love it.
So, 4 o'clock this morning, I went downstairs and fed the dogs. So, that was my act of love for those pets this morning.
Did you give them bacon is what I want to know. Did you go above and beyond and give them a bacon treat? I just have the picture in my head.
No, not today. We do have those, and I am liberal with them. But at 4 o'clock this morning, my goal was to get the food in the bowl and lay back down somewhere.
Yeah. And did you succeed?
I did.
You succeed in this? Okay, that's really good to hear. I now running through my head right now is that whole commercial, bacon, bacon, bacon.
Right.
Bacon. I don't know if you remember that. That's such a good commercial. That was back when we had commercials. So for our millennials that are listening, there used to be a day that there used to be this thing called commercials that would break up these TV shows or these movies, and they would always be at the most inopportune times. But now you can either click ad, or maybe there's not even a commercial, or you just DVR it and you can fast forward through them. But nevertheless, that's the olden days for some of us older millennials. And then, but you're an imposter millennial. You're like a Gen Xer. So I am
truly Gen X.
Yes,
I'm infiltrating. I'm the grumpy old man of the Millennial Roundtable today.
Well, we're glad that you're the grumpy old man at the Millennial Roundtable. But we have been talking about Southern Baptist life specifically, and so one of the things that just to give listeners kind of just be a disclaimer among listeners, I did go to a Southern Baptist seminary, grew up in a Southern Baptist church, and now work at a Southern Baptist, a higher education institution known as Dallas Baptist University here in the Dallas area. I lead our Institute for Global Engagement, which is a internal think tank organization in Dallas Baptist University that tries to address cultural issues with biblical truth. And so moonlight over here every once in a while when they lowered their standards to let me come over here. And so this hits pretty close to home with me. I've never, not that I know of, I've never been at a church in which this has happened. But I do know that I'm part of churches now, and I'm privy to conversations with churches that are doing everything that they can to be able to make sure that this doesn't happen to them or isn't repeated with them. And so there is, I think that's one of the things that we can take heart in, Lathan, is that it's absolutely atrocious. It's awful that it happened, but at least from my vantage point, and this is very much a convenient sample, there's a great encouragement that churches are beginning to take this seriously.
Yeah, I agree. You're not ever going to be able to craft a 100% foolproof solution to an issue like this. Because what the real issue is we live in a fallen world, and we're all imperfect people. And until we are perfected, we will be dealing with sin and its consequences. And the only thing churches can do is to try and put things in place to prevent this from happening, or if it has happened in your church, to deal with the situation and prevent it from happening again.
Mm-hmm. So we are going to continue taking some of your phone calls. So you can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. We'd love to hear your comments relative to the Southern Baptist Convention, some of the controversy, the crisis that embroils it right now. You can call in 800-351-1212. We're going to take a phone call right now. We've got, in Georgia, we've got Steve on the line. So, Pastor Steve, are you there?
I am. I enjoy your program very much.
Thank you.
I got a question first. Your guest from Liberty Baptist Institute, is that connected to Liberty Baptist University?
No, sir. We're First Liberty Institute. That's our name. We are a nonprofit law firm that practices exclusively in the religious liberty litigation area. So no affiliation with the university.
I gotcha. I've been the Southern Baptist pastor for about 30 years and endorsed through the North American Mission Board as a chaplain, active duty and reserve, made lieutenant colonel. I just understand the history of the Baptist is that every church is autonomous. Mm-hmm. And so that means that bureaucrats who are North American Mission Board or Foreign Mission Board or one of the 6 seminaries, they don't rule the individual church. The individual church makes their own decision. Mm-hmm. They can be a member of Southern Baptist and, say, Cooperative Baptist Fellowship, which is another entity. Many Southern Baptist people are also Cooperative Baptist Fellowship because of women ordination issue. But my point is our whole history from Roger Williams, 1636 throughout, identifies every Baptist church as autonomous. So if there's problems with sexual issues, that's a legal issue, and that individual autonomous church, they're going to have to deal with it. The only thing you can do is maybe teach people at the seminaries that, deviation is wrong, and that pedophilia is wrong, and that, you can identify those issues, but every church is autonomous. So I don't quite understand the article in the Houston Chronicle and all of it. Doesn't make any sense. We're not the Roman Catholic Church. We're not the Methodist Church. We're not the Episcopal Church. Those are different structures. Does this make sense to you?
Yeah, I think one of the things that, especially from a denominational standpoint, one of the things that at least state conventions are trying to figure out right now is how in this new, and especially you've been in the Southern Baptist life for 30 years, and so you would be able to speak to this much more than I can. There used to be there wasn't as many networks as there are now. There used to be much more uniformity. Like everybody was going through the Sunday school board. Like if I was taking a vacation away from Tennessee to North Carolina or to South Carolina, for example, what I was learning in my 6th grade Sunday school class would be the same thing that I would be learning in the other Sunday school class halfway across the country if I went to a Southern Baptist church during that time. There was a great uniformity that was happening all throughout Southern Baptist life, and a part of that was some of the convention resources that were provided to the local churches. Local churches didn't have to do that, but the local churches chose to do that. So there was uniformity, even though it was voluntary in nature. Now we're living at a time in which many churches and just business has moved into this space that are offering different curriculum, that are offering different resources for some of these churches, whether it's leadership training, whether it's character development, whether it's curriculum, et cetera, et cetera. This isn't just coming from the convention anymore, but this is coming from other entities as well, which provides a little bit more flexibility in that autonomy. One of the things that I think the convention has the opportunity to do in this vantage point is to be able to offer services to local churches, saying that this is a problem that we're beginning to see and the world is beginning to see. So now this provides us an opportunity to provide you a service to help in that. Not force it upon them, but help them in it.
I agree. The Southern Baptist Convention only meets for 3 days every year. Mm-hmm. And churches can go along with what is adopted in that convention, or they can go a different direction. Mm-hmm. But, yes, things have changed. Associational missionaries used to be called director of missions. Now they're called associational ministry strategists. Mm-hmm. Titles change. Lifeway is no longer church training, Southern Baptist. Lifeway really is connected, but they're putting out all different type of literature. Mm-hmm. It is not typically Southern Baptist doctrine, but that's good. We can learn from charismatic groups that we may not have agreed with in the past. So you're correct, but you're correct in saying that we can teach in our seminaries. We can teach, which there are 6, mm-hmm. that there are sexual standards. And, they could teach the biblical standard of purity. Yeah.
Well, Pastor Steve, we appreciate it so much for your call in, but we've got to take a break right now. But when we come back, we're going to continue taking your phone calls. So you can call in 800-351-1212. More on the Southern Baptist Convention, some of the crisis. We'll be back right after this.
Roadside Attractions presents Run the Race. 2 brothers share an unbreakable bond, but life's unexpected adversities put their future in question.
It's all part of his plan, right?
God does love you. He loves you like crazy.
From executive producers Tim Tebow and Robbie Tebow, Run the Race. Rated PG, parental guidance suggested. In theaters February 22nd. More information is available at runtheracemovie.com.
Jesus said you could find a person's heart by where they invest their money. We at Point of View could not be more thankful that so many demonstrate a love for truth and for this nation by investing in our common mission. Of course, the reality is our team, our truth team, is a small percentage of those who listen. And right now, as they say in sports, we could use a deeper bench. For those who have given, thank you. And if you haven't made that step yet, take one now. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Show your heart for our future. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
Hello. Good to have you back here. Sorry you caught me off guard here for a little bit. Thank you so much for joining us on Point of View. Got Latham Watts around the roundtable. We have been talking about the Southern Baptist Convention, some of the initiatives that are coming out of that based on some of the controversy that happened, has been happening over the years, but has been reported over the past couple of weeks with the San Antonio Express and the Houston Chronicle. And it just shows that we've been following for 18 years the tragedy that's been happening in the Catholic Church, the number of priests that are abusing children, and we've just watched on with horror to figure out where does it end. And knowing right now that the Vatican and the Pope have ordered a conference that's going on at this very moment right now about how they might be able to move forward from that. And then what we found out over two weeks ago, because of the reporting, just some great reporting out of the Houston Chronicle, is that this isn't just a Catholic issue. This is also a Baptist issue as well. And so Southern Baptists are largely, one of the chief characteristics for Southern Baptists is this idea known as autonomy, where there is not a hierarchical structure like there is in the Catholic Church, that where the Pope says something and every entity responds in turn. Whereas with Southern Baptists, it's not, there's no Baptist Pope. There is a local senior pastor, and he kind of organizes, he makes the decisions for that particular church. And even that in and of itself is subject to the church. The church can form its own structure in such a way that might be suitable to their needs as well. And so we've been talking about around the idea of what you think about what's happened in Southern Baptist life, but also what are some next steps as to how we might be able to move from this as well. And we've been taking some of your phone calls, so you can continue to call in. That number is 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. And we're going to jump on over to Alex right now. Alex in Kansas. Alex, are you there?
Yes, I am, sir.
Hey, Alex, what's your point of view?
My point of view is this. I totally get the distinction between the Southern Baptist Convention is not Rome, is not the Episcopal Church, is not even the Methodist or even the Presbyterian. I understand that there is that level of ecclesiastical polity that is very flexible, if you will. But ultimately, here's the problem, and I'll speak for my own church as an Anglican. I'm part of the Anglican Communion, and in my communion, we have an archbishop, and under that archbishop, we have other bishops, and we have priests, and they're responsible for running dioceses. But the archbishop of my diocese does not answer necessarily to the Archbishop of Canterbury or the Archbishop of Nigeria. Even within that, bishops have the autonomy. What makes a church is those congregations coming together to make that communion. And so even though I understand that, yeah, Baptists are congregational churches, despite that fact, you have churches that have come together to create the Southern Baptist Convention. You guys, I say you guys, but the Southern Baptist Convention has decided that it wants to have a visible form of community to symbolize the fact that Christ is made one in the church and actualized in the church. And so, yeah, this might be a problem with a church or two, but if those churches are in communion with other churches, that still speaks towards that communion, the same way that the Episcopal Church, whether I like it or not, and some of the poor decisions they've made, those speak for the Anglican communion at large. But that's all I had to say.
Yeah, I think you've done a great job of articulating just the tension that many Southern Baptists feel, because there is a sense that that there is a level of autonomy without fail. I'll give an example from back home. Pastor Larry cannot tell Pastor Gary downtown at the downtown First Baptist what to do. He can't tell him how to run his church. Pastor Gary cannot tell Brother Larry what he can do at his church on Madison Street. You cannot. But what you can do, unfortunately, and not just unfortunately, this is more of a Christian standpoint. Like, we're all a part of the same community. So a strike on one of us is a strike on all of us. That's why there's this collective sense in the midst of this. So there's the push and pull, the tension that you articulated of yes and no. Yes, there is those robust, those thick relational community lines that we have with one another, that when there's one of us that can rejoice, all of us rejoice. So when Pastor Larry has a great baptism Sunday, we all can rejoice in that, not only within a particular city, but also within a denominational network. But on the flip side, when there's a scandal that erupts, we all can feel a sense of mourning because we're all a part of this Christian community. We're all a part of the Christian body. And in turn, we're all being it's reflected on us because we all know those people. We even share that same town as well. But again, there's that relational autonomy. Pastor Larry cannot tell Pastor Gary what's going on. And so I think that's important. But I think you bring up a really great tension, though, that I think needs to be accentuated as well. We're going to continue taking phone calls right now. We've got James on the line. James, are you there?
I am.
Hey, James, what's your point of view?
Well, I'm going to state three things that seem like been overlooked by most callers. First of all, I've been a Southern Baptist for almost 70 years, and I have observed some problems in churches through those years. And the situation is, first of all, this sexual abuse is wrong, yes, but it becomes a civil issue, and as a citizen of the United States, when we discover this, that should be taken care of in the civil court. But the responsibility of the church at large, somebody said something about the pastor decides. Pastor doesn't decide anything except what he's going to preach on Sunday or Sunday night or whatever. The church decides all the governing things that happen in church, but the church can, if this individual, youth director or pastor or deacon, if he's confronted with this and fellowship is withdrawn from him, he'll go somewhere else and to want to join the church. And most Southern Baptist churches accept membership, first of all, by baptism, second of all, by a letter of recommendation from the former church. At that point, then the church has the responsibility to inform the new congregation this man's gone to, or woman.
Mm-hmm.
They have the responsibility to tell them, no, we've had this problem with this person. We've discontinued fellowship with him, and we can't recommend him.
Yeah.
And it's everybody has all kinds of opinions about this, but I think the main thing is that the word be let out. First of all, if I have privy to some incident that needs to be dealt with the civil authorities, I've taught in the school system, we're called mandated reporters. But as citizens and Christians, we need to consider ourselves mandated reporters in situations like this and turn this over to the legal authorities.
I completely agree, James. I mean, you've nailed it on the head to a large degree of, there might not be an instance where there might not be a policy that I have to say something, but there should be a something compelling within your soul that says, I got to say something, right, Lathan?
Absolutely.
Like this isn't like I don't have a policy that tells me how to drive, but I guess to a certain degree there are laws that tell me what I can't do when I drive and what I should do. But there are other instances that I realize that this is just common courtesy. This is just the right thing to do. Not everything has to be outlined for me.
Right, exactly. I mean, just because there's no law that compels you to do something doesn't mean that it's not the right thing to do.
Yeah.
So obviously, if a situation like that comes to your attention, you have to do something about it.
Yeah.
And that may involve, turning it over to local police.
And I think that's one of the things that I think people miss out on right now. And what I was so encouraged by, there's certain individuals in Southern Baptist life that have really accentuated this point, that when something wrong happens in the church and you see it or you know it, you don't just simply go to the pastor. You also go to the police as well. Because, again, it's called cocktail party pressure. Some of this party pressure that we can experience through these cocktail hours, and again, not necessarily at the cocktail hour, it keeps individuals from being able to report it and go through with it, right? And so, it's old John, or they're okay. This is just one bad incident. They'll be okay. Well, no, you can't allow that to happen, especially when children are involved as well at that. Okay, we've got to take a break right now, but when we come back from the break, we're going to continue talking a little bit about the Southern Baptist life, but I really want to hone in on this Harper's Magazine story that we've been kind of touching on about millennials, entitlement, sense of guilt, all about money. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Sometimes the substantial burden on a person's religious exercise comes literally to the steps of the Supreme Court. The U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia recently dismissed a lawsuit alleging that preventing anti-war activists from demonstrating outside the Supreme Court violated the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. The activists noted in their complaint that as a post-denominational Christian and unity Christian, their religious beliefs compel protest against war. They insist on living out their spirituality through prayer vigils and peace walks, sometimes on the Supreme Court's steps. Interestingly, the court never questioned the sincerity of their beliefs, no matter how odd they may seem. Nevertheless, the court determined that RFRA did not protect their religious acts of protest. Why? Because the rule restricts, quote, only one of a multitude of means by which plaintiffs could engage in their religiously motivated activity, unquote. According to their own words, the steps of the Supreme Court are not the only place in which to exercise their beliefs. It's just one of the places they exercise their beliefs. So, while the rules might burden their religious exercise, it's not a substantial burden since there are many avenues left open to their religious exercise. RFRA provides broad protection to those who seek to exercise their religion, even when they attempt to do so in public. This case reminds us that RFRA correctly balances that right against the legitimate needs of government to govern. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Learn more and request a free In God We Trust window cling at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org and get your free In God We Trust window cling.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Hey, welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. We have been talking a little bit about the Southern Baptist Convention, some of the controversy that's embroiled in it. But we're going to change topics, Lathan, because I need you, I want to hear from you on this particular topic in particular, because you are a Gen Xer. And so I highly anticipated you coming in here with your grunge rock T-shirt,
right.
Your chip on your shoulder,
right.
because you guys got skipped over, and you're wondering where's all the topics about me. But you know what? You just need to get over it for a second,
right?
Because there is a huge story. I thought it was a great article. It was a funny. I'll say this: it wasn't a funny article. I thought it was a telling article about millennials and this sense of guilt. I guess the best way for me to think about it is just this looming sense of guilt for many millennials. And what the article is talking about is there is a growing movement. Why does it feel like everyone has more money than you? Which was in Harper's Bazaar magazine. And one of the fascinating things is we're more prone to see individuals' lifestyles now because of social media, specifically from a millennial standpoint. And it seems as though everyone's living these lavish lives. Everyone's doing these outlandish and crazy cool things. And we're wondering, as millennials now, because we're just not people that are in college anymore. All of us are in the workforce now, or at least all of us are of age in the workforce now. And we're thinking to ourselves, how do they have money to have this great brownstone in New York or to go on these crazy vacations? And what the article seemed to indicate is it pointed out some data points like like certain individual, like the average parent is giving $7,000 to their child per year postgraduate, and the blessing that comes with a family that's still supporting you to a large degree, but also the guilt that comes with it as well. And so as a Gen Xer reading this article, tell me, how bitter are you on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being coffee, 10 being dark chocolate?
Yeah. So my initial reaction to the article was there's 20 minutes of my life I'm never getting back. That's it. And that's probably a typical Gen X response. Yeah, we're those guys sandwiched between you and the boomers.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't like either one.
We're sucking the oxygen out of that room like a dang flight. Got an air window out.
But really, I read it and I was like, because the joke in our office was I was going to be the grumpy old man at the Millennial Roundtable, being the Gen Xer now. And I read it, I was like, oh man, now I really am going to be the grumpy old man when I read this. Because my first reaction was, this is what people don't like about millennials.
Oh yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Get out of your own head.
Yeah,
just quit. Just stop doing this.
Yeah,
please. Okay, you have grown up in the age of social media. Okay,
yeah.
I came to it later. I was older, so I get. You see things on social media and you think, okay, why not me? The fear of missing out or whatever. But at some point, you got to realize that the image that people are portraying on social media is not true. It is their own. It's how they want to see themselves.
Yeah.
This is how they want you to see them.
Yeah.
And just stop.
Yeah.
Okay. Don't worry about how much money the other guy's making. Be happy for him. If he's that rich, God bless you. I'm happy for you.
Yeah.
Go get out of your own head. Go to work. Be successful and enjoy it.
I think one of the telling things for me is just the looming sense of guilt that many millennials have that have come from either means, one, or that have come from a family, two. I think it reveals, one, the disparity that happens. And the research is very clear on this. Brookings has coined what's called the success sequence. And what they found is individuals that finish high school, get married, or finish high school, get a job, get married, have a child, they have like an 8% chance or 8 or 2% chance of going into poverty, which is just
no matter where they started.
Yeah. It's just oh, well, duh. But then I realized that I come from individuals that perpetuated and embodied that sequence. And they came from individuals that embodied that sequence as well. That they heeded the dictum that has a clever lyrical line: first comes love, then comes marriage, then comes the baby or the child in the baby carriage, right? And so there's that piece, and then there's also the piece of, well, to a large degree, this is not me arguing for government redistribution. This is me just acknowledging that there are certain individuals that have means, that have families, and feel a sense of guilt when they come from that. And this is a privilege. You don't need to feel guilt for it, but you do need to be aware that you have to steward it, right? This isn't government trying to reach in the hand. This is just you acknowledging, I've been blessed, and in turn, a tree that bears fruit doesn't need its own fruit. It's got to bless others as well.
Certainly. Like I said, work hard, be successful, enjoy it.
Yeah.
And do good things with it.
Yeah.
That's the point of being successful, is to be able to benefit other people.
Yeah.
So don't feel bad about the fact that you had two parents that raised you right, and that you listened to their advice and you followed it, and it's paying off. Because I've read that study that you're talking about.
Yeah.
And those factors, if you follow those factors, regardless of the situation you were born into, if you follow that recipe, your chances of ever returning to poverty, even if you started out there, are very, very slim.
Yeah, it's
very,
so
very
minuscule.
slim.
It's either 2 or 8%. I can't remember what it was. And again, I just, one, the sense of guilt was so fascinating, and two, it's called, I believe the term is called, you're talking left but living right. And so it's the idea that even individuals that are on the ideological left are talking about, well, you don't really need to get married. Oh, well, you don't really need to be faithful to that partner. Oh, well, you don't really need to heed there's no such thing as moral absolutes. They're talking left, but they themselves are living right, as in they are married. There's certain faithfulness. There are moral absolutes that they hold to, and so they're living this kind of duplicitous lifestyle, and they're reaping the benefits of that lifestyle, which social science just indicates. Individuals that get married end up making more. It's so fascinating, some of the research that's out relative to men in particular. If your wife kisses you before you go to work in the morning, you are more likely to work harder, work more efficient, and be more of a positive contributor to the atmosphere of the environment. You're going to get paid more over the long run as well. You have more earning power. You're a kinder driver, just based on this was a fascinating study out of France, just based on your wife showing affection to you in the morning. And so again, it just goes back to just some of these things, the social science just proving what the biblical principle has always showed us to be true. And again, it's not something it's a privilege. We recognize it as a privilege one. Privilege isn't bad. We're all born with certain privileges. We've all been gifted with certain skill sets and abilities that allow us to be able to experiencing a flourishing life. It's stewarding those well and not necessarily feeling guilt about those detrimentally as well.
Certainly. I mean, there's no denying the fact that every person who is born is impacted by the choices their parents make.
Oh, yeah. Easy.
Okay. But the beautiful thing about this country is it doesn't have to determine the rest of your life.
Oh, yeah.
You have more opportunity here to grow beyond, wherever you started than any place on the planet, and really at any time in the history of the world.
Yeah.
I mean, we talk about the fact that most people are walking around with a device in their pocket that has access to the accumulation of all human history.
Yeah.
And if
some
you
really funny videos.
And if you stop using it just to take pictures of your food and post those to social media and contribute to this image of yourself, and use what is available to you, you can be succlateful.
Okay.
And there's no reason to feel guilty about it. Work hard, enjoy success, do good things with it.
Okay, Lathan, I will get off your yard, okay? I'll get off your yard, okay? It's enough, okay? I get it. Well, Lathan, thank you so much for joining us, Lathan of the First Liberty Institute. Be sure to follow them. You can go to our website, pointofview.net, to be able to find out more information on their case, as well as find out more information on Dallas Baptist University, dbu.edu. We've got to go, but we'll see you next time.
Question: do you have a health insurance plan you are not happy with? Well, Bethany and Jason thought they were stuck. Their plan just kept getting more expensive, and Bethany's favorite doctor didn't even take that plan anymore. And then some friends at church told them about MediShare.
With our previous insurance, we were paying $1,200 a month. With MediShare, we now pay around $600 a month.
Yes, they're paying $600 less per month, and that's a pretty typical savings with MediShare. And they actually like MediShare more.
I was able to go back to my original doctor that I absolutely loved, and it's just been an absolutely beautiful thing being a part of MediShare.
Yeah, so they pay a lot less, and they like it more. No wonder MediShare is growing so fast. Find out more. They're super easy to talk to. All you have to do is call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.